Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Randy Graham at Central Region Headquarters. Thank you for joining this week's guest speaker series. We have a great set of presentations lined up today, all focused on the December 10th, 2021 tornado outbreak. Really appreciate this group coming on and giving these presentations for such a historic event. Christine Wielgos, who's the WCM at Paducah, will present a baptism by fire talk, how this event occurred right after she became WCM. Kyle Perez, a forecaster at Springfield, is going to present on remote mesoanalysis support and service backup. And Dan McKemy, a forecaster from Louisville, is going to present on radar warning operator perspective and drone work. But first, we're going to start off with Ryan Sharp, who's the SOO in Louisville, and he's going to talk about the EFI and how it did, anticipating or kind of hinting at this event in advance. So I want to thank all four speakers for coming on and presenting this material today, and I will turn it over to you, Ryan. Thanks.
Thanks, Randy, and thanks for having us. And I'm glad we're able to present all this, and we were able to get this through even with some severe weather last night. Yeah, this is a drone image from Northeast Bowling Green that John Gordon took as he was going over some area that I had surveyed on the ground. And this was by far the worst damage that I had ever seen when I was doing a survey. I've done about 10 to 20 surveys in my career. And both here and in Logan County, the county west, I had my first two EF3 tornadoes. So historically speaking, December is one of our least prolific months for tornadoes. It was the least likely month in the year that we would have tornadoes in central Kentucky and southern Indiana. Up to this year, this 2021, we had 9 recorded tornadoes total for the month of December. This event by itself had 18 tornadoes, and it was actually tied for the 3rd most prolific outbreak of tornadoes in any of our area. Despite this rarity, we did have some ensemble tools, some of the newer tools that are coming online that were hitting at this severe event upcoming. And it gave us actually really good lead time on the stuff that we're seeing. And I'm going to show you some of that in this talk. And actually, as we're going through, if you guys have any questions, just mark them down. We're going to try to have a Q&A after each individual talk here, so feel free to ask. So Jess Lee, one of our forecasters here in the office, she actually started studying the EFI back in early 2021 and started looking at the shift of tails as well. And we'll talk a little bit about those things. But she learned the system first, and then she made educational slides for the staff to learn from. So I just take that as a best practice because it's really good for all these new tools that are coming out. It might be a good idea just to have one person in your office sort of become the focal point or the point of contact for it, and to teach the rest of the staff. So through the rest of 2021, we had multiple examples of how the EFI and the shift of tails did for different events. And this was one of the examples. In the upper right, we had a heavy rain event that verified in late February of 2021. And I just sort of went through a flow chart here of what the EFI showed for QPF, and then what the actual graph shows with your shift of tails co-located with your EFI. And then what I ended up verifying for rainfall totals in our area, as well as the verification of the flash flood warnings that we had issued. Continuing on, there was another case study that was done with the President's Day system of 2021 that had a lot of snow over parts of the Southeast Central region area. Andy Just did another good case for a larger scale in this bottom right image, showing stronger wind gust potential over a broad part of Central region back there on October 13th. So between all those, we had plenty of examples, and that's just a sampling. We had other examples too. I just wanted to show you some of the things that we had. So what was the EFI showing ahead of this historic tornado outbreak? I have an animated GIF here. Hopefully it's showing through well with what you guys are seeing. But first off, notice that you have peaks that go from the beginning of the loop. Let me wait till it gets to that beginning, and it continues to move up. So you have your peaks that are your yellows and reds and pinks, and they're showing up in multiple parameters. So you got your cape shear, your 10-meter wind speed and wind gust, max T, min T, and the QPF. In this case, the QPF is going to show up as a green shading instead of the other colors. But anytime that you have all of these parameters over the same area, something's going to go on, and that's what happened in this case. Remember, just from any kind of lessons that you've had, that an EFI that's greater than 0.8, so in this dark yellow or getting into the red colors, indicates a very unusual event is likely. And anytime you get a shift of tails that's over that co-located, any kind of shift of tail, even if it's a zero contour, it indicates that at least 10% of the ensemble members lie outside of the first or the 99th percentile of the model climatology. And again, this is from the European model climatology. If you get to a shift of tails of 1 or greater, then you up the ante for the potential of an increasingly extreme event. So you can tell that there was a persistent signal even out to day 7, but something was going to go on here. Hang on 1 second. Okay. So our Central Region Southeast Sioux community actually hosted a joint workshop on November 30th, just a few days before this outbreak happened. And one of the talks did focus on the EFI. We were looking at several different ensemble tools that you had, but we were using them through the President's Day 2021 snow event to see how each tool handled it. And links to those presentations are given here on the bottom of the slide. The Southeast Sioux workshop, the whole workshop in general, the individual talk. If you go to the one on the EFI, you just go to the 28-minute mark. And if you'd like a quick reference guide on the EFI and the shift of tails, it's down here in the bottom right, and you can get the real-time data. One thing that's really nice about the website is that there's a good archive of EFI. You can go back for quite a bit of time. So between these examples and all the consistent training that we had, seeing the very persistent signal for an unusual event to occur somewhere in the Ohio Valley, our forecasters were able to start sounding the alarm that something dangerous was coming. And we could see that in our AFD messaging. We began mentioning the threat for stronger storms on the Sunday mid-shift, well before the Friday event. Unfortunately, we had another smaller tornado event that came through early on the mid-shift Monday morning. They had to deal with a couple of small but nocturnal tornadoes. And actually, those tornadoes may have helped later with our messaging, because we were able to say that we have another upcoming nocturnal tornado threat, and it's going to be greater. So they sort of woke people up. Yeah, we need to have some kind of way to get messaging in the middle of the night, and they were definitely paying attention. So between that, we were putting headlines in each of our discussions. We were putting in forecast confidence with hard-hitting day shift AFDs. This is the Thursday before. We talked about the EFI, the shift of tails, increases our confidence in a highly unusual event. So definitely good targeted messaging that was going out. We also initiated the remote mesoanalyst program a day earlier than normal. We were able to sit there and say, we're going to need to have this planned. We actually just used it again last night. It was a really good program with Alex Kroll, providing a lot of good mesoanalysis for a couple of left-moving hailers that we had go over our CWA. The discussion between Dan McKemy, who's going to talk a little bit later in this, and Keith Sherburn for this event was just really great. And you can go back. The neat thing about this mesoanalysis program is that you can go back and look at some of these previous discussions if you get into that Google chat. We also intentionally moved our shift schedule around, our staffing, so that we could make sure we had our best radar operators ready to go that night. Since we knew this was going to be a big event, we don't get these very often. In fact, the last EF3 tornado, if I remember right, was back in 2012. So it had been quite a bit of time since we had something that strong. And we set up our staffing plan to be able to give our radar expert there the best timing window for us. We also started up our conference calls a day earlier than normal. And we normally wouldn't do it unless we would get up into that slight or a large area of slight or expanded enhanced slight risk. But in this case, we're like, no, we're going to go ahead and get this done a little bit early. And that got noticed by our partners, giving them a little bit extra time to be able to look at what we were going to be issuing. And we also put out several graphics throughout the week. Analytics were just off the charts. People were using these graphics quite a bit. We posted educational material One of our Pathway students, Sam Miklovitz, generated this one about how to turn on your smartphone WIA alerts, especially since we knew this was a nocturnal threat. This just really got people's attention. And then I'll close it out here. We went out and surveyed for at least 2 weeks afterwards. But then I insisted the staff, if they had any kind of stories, I insisted that they let everybody know. And we collected all these for our after action review. And we had a lot of survivor stories, and people directly told us, I'll leave this screen up for a little while. People directly told us that the messaging saved their lives. And that just means a lot, especially when you're dealing with the trauma. And Dan will talk about this in his talk, of issuing the warnings and knowing that people's lives were at risk. Just to know that people were listening, paying attention, got the message in the middle of the night, they heard the warnings, and it made a difference. It meant a lot to us. And especially it helped us afterwards when we had Valerie Gardner come out the month after in January, and we were able to talk about this event. So that's all that I had, Randy. If anybody has any questions about the EFI or other things, I'm ready to answer.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Great presentation. If you have a question, please raise your virtual hand or type it into the questions pane, and I will relay it. So question for you, Ryan, while we're waiting to see if anybody else has anything that they want to offer up. Do you have any suggestions for folks on how to get comfortable looking at the EFI, like looking at it when it's not just in your area, for example, or something like that, when there's storms elsewhere? How have you kind of introduced it in your office, and how do you suggest people get comfortable with it if they're not already?
Yeah, I mean, if maybe your office hasn't done it at all, maybe they haven't used it at all, that's where I suggest having one forecaster as a point of contact, somebody that can learn it and can show it in examples for the staff and get them introduced to it. Jess did a great job. Like I said, she probably did about 3 or 4 different case studies. And then we had Andy Just, we had people at Region that were sending out these case studies ahead of an event. And that's a key there. You can do it afterwards, and that's great. But if you can do it ahead of the event and show where there might be some messaging that you can put in your AFD, but it's key to have at least one person that's understanding what's going on. And it's a steep learning curve. But there's also the reference guides that I put in one of the earlier slides. That's Jason Schauman and I worked on that for one of the workshop that we did last year. And so that was really useful.
Thanks, Ryan. Great comments. A couple of things that you mentioned there that I think are really critical. One, I think having somebody, like you said, on the staff become an expert. I love peer-to-peer learning on the forecast floor, on the operations floor among forecasters. I think is so effective. And then another thing you mentioned was, looking at it ahead of events and not just in a post-event standpoint. It's so much more effective, and I think, to look at and learn when you don't know what the answer is,
Right.
and look at it in that way. So thanks so much, Ryan. I don't see any hands raised or any questions at this time, so we'll move on to Christine Wielgos, who is the WCM at Paducah, and she's going to talk about her baptism by fire. So Christine, thanks so much for joining. Take it away. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to share my story because, yeah, it was quite a week for me. So starting out, so my NWS journey, I've been in the Weather Service since March of 2000. I've been at the Paducah office as an intern. I came in as an intern and worked my way all the way up. So I've been here for 22 years. And I was under the wing of Mr. Rick Shanklin, so I know a lot of you know who that is. And I spent the better part of 2 decades basically under his wing. And so I've been through a lot of events and a lot of other things with him, but he retired and I was officially selected to be the WCM at Paducah. And my first official day was December 5th. So to start my week as WCM, well, as Ryan had mentioned, we did have severe weather that had occurred over the weekend of 4th and 5th. So I actually was trying to deal with that, but I actually had vacation scheduled from December 4th through the 12th, as my thought process was, hey, not much severe weather happens here. Let's take the week off. Well, that didn't work out too well because I was called in for damage surveys on the 6th and 7th. And so there went the first part of my vacation. But it only gets worse from there as, you know, we go back a little bit here. It was only going to get worse, as you all know. Our office, as did Louisville and many other offices, we started to really see the event come to fruition. We knew something bad was going to be happening on the 10th, and we started messaging really early as well and ramped up slowly through the week. And so my week off really turned into be not a week off. As any WCM out there knows, you're never really truly off unless you completely shut down your phone and your email. And so as the week continued to progress, I started to see more and more emails, more and more texts, more and more phone calls. And one of the things that we did the day before is actually Winter Weather Preparedness Week, usually that first week in December. And so I had already scheduled to do a Facebook Live to do that, you know, to do the preparedness campaign. And one of the things that came up, and you guys can see the comments on the screen there, people were like, why are we talking about winter weather? There's a major severe weather event that's going to be unfolding tomorrow. We want to know about that. And so I basically calmed them all down and said, listen, let me get through what I need to get through with this Winter Weather Preparedness Week, and then we will talk for as long as you guys want about the severe weather tomorrow. So I already kind of had a feel that the public was amped up. They were scared, and they wanted to know everything that we knew. And so we spent the time to go over with them, you know, what was going on. That's my boss, Steve Betty, there on all the way on the right. So he and I spent a lot of time, along with our other partners there, trying to talk about what was going to happen. And that was all because of the great work that our office did and all the other surrounding offices did to message what was going to be happening. And so, you know, even though I had to be dealing with damage surveys at the beginning of the week, I quickly transitioned to figuring out, you know, how are we going to deal with this event coming up on Friday. So yeah, my stress level was exponentially increasing, but I was glad to see that the public was actually taking heed to the messaging we were putting out. And they knew that this was something they really needed to keep an eye on. And I think that was really important that we were giving them information that we needed to do. So kind of fast forwarding to December 10th, you know, the day of the tornado, I was actually officially off work. Again, I was supposed to be on vacation, right? But like I mentioned before, the number of texts and phone calls and emails that were revolving around what was going to happen with the weather that day just never ceased during that day. And I remember distinctly calling into the office numerous times saying, hey, you guys okay? Do you need my help? And one of the last times I called, one of the leads said, you know, you probably should rest up, Christine, because I have a feeling, you know, you will hit the ground running Saturday morning. And boy, was he correct on that. You know, as being somebody that spent the last 20 years or so in operations as a shift worker, it was very odd not being in the office. You know, you have to transition yourself when you become a WCM that, you know, you are not necessarily going to be part of operations. So, you know, that's when, you know, I was told, you know, we're going to need you later on, so rest up. And so while I was at home, I, of course, was watching the weather like everybody else. And I started to see that monster supercell that was developing and moving across Northeast Arkansas and then moving into the Missouri Boot Heel. And you just kind of know, any meteorologist that was watching this kind of knew that this was going to be the storm. So again, in that position of being a WCM and not a lead forecaster or a forecaster, your mind is going to think differently on what exactly is going to unfold. What is my next day, my next couple of days, my next weeks, months? So talk about having major anxiety at this point. You know, my mind's racing. Is this going to be really bad? How bad is it going to be? How many people are going to be impacted? What am I going to do first? You know, I was pretty much having a panic attack as it was moving close to the Tennessee-Kentucky border. I was getting very nervous. I knew the staff had it. I was not worried about that at all. I just knew this was going to be bad. And that was what's racing through my head at that point. So as soon as the storm crossed over into Kentucky, I knew that Mayfield was in the crosshairs, and I knew that this was seriously becoming a very serious situation. And being at home, you know, you're kind of, I felt just kind of held back that I couldn't do anything. But I just made this executive decision. I said, you know what? I don't care if they've been called already. I feel like I need to do something. And so I felt compelled to just call the emergency managers that were in the path that had already gone through Mayfield. So I picked up the phone and called Marshall County. I called Lyon County. And before I can even get to, I called Caldwell County too, but before I can get to the other 2 counties, I was already inundated with phone calls. And that's when chaos ensued. As soon as it started going through the middle part of Western Kentucky there, it became an actual chaos. And I remember distinctly the one call that really hit me hard, and that was the call from our Region 1 EM Director, David Elliott. And he said, is very, to the point. He said, Christine, we have extensive damage, we have numerous injuries and numerous deaths. You might as well just stuck a dagger through my heart. I just froze. I didn't even know what to think. I knew it had the potential to be bad, but when you actually hear those words coming from your emergency manager, there's nothing that really prepares you for that. It's been a long time since we've seen a tornado of this magnitude across our CWA. And so to say that I was overwhelmed and in shock at this point is pretty much an understatement. My mind really couldn't fully process what had just happened and what the implications were going to be, not only for myself as a WCM, but for our entire office and for our entire community. And so after numerous phone calls between my boss and the SUE and the office and back and forth, my very last phone call was to my predecessor and my mentor, Mr. Rick Shanklin. And I'm like, if anybody is going to get me through this, it's going to be Rick. And so when I called him, the first 3 words out of my mouth were, Rick, I'm scared. And so after he talked me down off the ledge a little bit, you try to go to sleep, but not many of us got much sleep at all that night. So the next day, December 11th, we reconvened very early in the morning, and Steve Eddy and I, we went to Mayfield. And as soon as you cross over, it's kind of like a hill to get into Mayfield. As soon as you cross over that hill, it looked like somebody dropped a bomb on the city of Mayfield. And you just are taken aback by the immense damage, and the widespread nature of the damage was just something that, I've seen a lot of tornadoes, I've seen a lot of damage surveys, been a lot of damage surveys, but nothing prepares you for just the scope of what unfolded there, especially there in Mayfield. So it was beyond shocking. You're numb. You don't even know how to comprehend what you're seeing. So to start off the bat right away, there were so many concerns to deal with. Where do we send people? At this point, we didn't know it was a continuous track. We didn't know how bad it was. We didn't know how many deaths there were exactly. There's so much damage to survey. There's so many buildings that were destroyed that, you try to get into the data to figure out, well, what am I going to rate this? I don't even know what it was. So you're looking at Google Maps to try to figure out, well, like that building in the picture in the upper right, is that a 1-story building? Is it a 2-story building? I have no idea. There was so much traffic. The rescue teams are still in recovery mode, still, trying to find people. You still have people doing damage removal, taking away that evidence that you need to help figure out what to rate this. There's short days, the sun goes down, it's dark by 5 o'clock. Trying to figure out where are the worst damaged areas. The cell service was down, so trying to use the DAT was just a nightmare. Then you've got, my phone's blown up with people wanting press conferences and interviews, and you've got to do press releases and then messaging to the public, making sure your staff is okay. How are they handling all the phone calls coming into the office? I was worried about them. What about forecasts for recovery? And the list goes on and on. I can't capture all of this in a 10-15 minute presentation, but you guys get the gist. So shortly after we started doing the surveying in Mayfield, I get a text, and I don't even remember who it was. It was just, I think it was somebody in headquarters or on Kentucky State Police or State EMA. They said, hey, there's a helicopter gonna land in Mayfield, get on it. I'm like, okay. So that's when we really were able to see the full scope of the story. So Pat Spoden, a former SUE here at Paducah, and I got on the helicopter, and the aerial survey really quickly told the story that this was a continuous path from the Kentucky state line all the way through the end, at least through our CWA, and even beyond into Louisville CWA. I had my head to the window, and there was absolutely no break in the damage. And I can't tell you how many times I turned to look at Pat and just mouthed the words, oh my God, just because it was just so amazing to see not only the continuous path, but this thing was a mile wide through its entire life cycle. And, at least EF2 damage throughout the entire path. I've never seen so many trees uprooted or snapped in my life. And the number of structures, and there was certain points in the aerial track that, you know, for instance, Dawson Springs. I mean, the damage from the air, it just looks like you just dropped a bomb on them. Same thing with Mayfield. It's just unbelievable. And so it was when we got off that helicopter that reality set in, and we're like, there's no way we're going to do this alone. And so that's when we started calling in mutual aid. Thank God for NWS Springfield. Thank God for NWS Lincoln and all the other people that have helped us, whether they were here at the office with us or helping us through email traffic. I know I talked with a lot of people via email. I mean, the mutual aid was just stupendous. The amount of help we received from region, headquarters and all that. You can't do this alone. It's just too big. So on Sunday, again, you continue to have survey teams go out, as many as we can. Again, we had help from Lincoln and Springfield. The QRT eventually came down, which was great. NWS Nashville, there was a secondary long track tornado that actually happened to the south and actually creeped into the southeast portion of our CWA. And Chrissy Hurley and her team helped me with that. So on Sunday, Steve and I tried to figure out where the beginning of the track was. We went all the way to the Tennessee line and found the beginning of the track, but we were immediately called back to the EOC, which was in Mayfield, for briefings. So we were asked to brief the Kentucky governor. Jim Cantori was interviewing us. And then came time, and I really didn't really know at this point that I was going to be involved in this until they said, hey, there's going to be a national press conference. Christine's never done a national press conference before. So I remember Steve. Steve, you can see him there in the pictures there. That's my boss, our MIC. And I remember him telling me, well, Christine, I can do it if you want me to, but you can do this. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. But you stand right there. I was pointing like right next to me. And so he was literally, I could see him out the corner of my eye while I was up there briefing literally hundreds of media. You can see, you know, some of the pictures there. It doesn't even show you the full scope of what the amount of people that were actually in this room. You know, at this point, you don't have very much to share. It's like the second day. We don't know anything. So I didn't have a whole lot to discuss. So I just told them what we knew. And like I said, you know, with my MIC right there by my side, I knew that if I screwed up or if I said something wrong or if I froze, he was right there to swoop in and save me. And that was a godsend, knowing he was right there. So the week beyond that, beyond Sunday, there was so much going on. You know, we had repeated 15, 16-hour days. You're getting up at the crack of dawn to get out there at first light. You're surveying all day long, and you get back to the office and you're dealing with all the other survey teams coming back, regrouping. What are we doing tomorrow? What are the other problems we have? How is the staff doing? You know, coordinating more damage surveys. 60 Minutes came in late Sunday night. We spent all day with them on Monday, and then I think on Tuesday, we filmed the segment for 60 Minutes. You know, again, still dealing with media interviews, the messaging on you know, social media. Where are we at? Why don't we have a rating yet? That was huge. The constant communications between the office and the field, the office at region, the office and headquarters. Again, questions of why the survey hadn't been done yet. Well, it's 128 square miles just in our CWA. That's not going to get done overnight. And then came the questions of, well, why are you not going EF5? I see slabs of foundation, having to deal with all that, making sure that the staff was okay. Staff was getting questions on that. And that was when I called region. I said, I need talking points, so that when I leave the office for the day and they're getting phone calls from an angry person about why this isn't an EF5, they've got something to go on and something that they feel confident that they can relay on interviews or just an angry public person. So with that, you get specialized requests. Well, here, come see my house. I've got a slab and I think it should be EF5 here. Dealing with those types of things. Again, the weather was not great the whole week after the tornado. So we have provided on-site DSS, and we created packets of information, DSS packets that we sent out every day for recovery. And, you know, I don't need to tell any of you that have done this for a long time that seeing widespread devastation, speaking to survivors, hearing stories, that wears on you when you're doing it day after day after day. You're not getting enough sleep, that kind of thing. But I will tell you one thing. When I look back almost a year later on this event, and I think about, how did I make it through? How did I survive? Well, the two guys you see there in the upper right-hand corner are the only reason that I was not going to lose my mind and tear my hair out. Not to mention the awesome staff here at Paducah. You know, they were so unbelievably supportive, and you know, you can't do this without a supportive staff. That you know the staff is going to be there and they're taking care of things, and so you can do your job where you need to do your job. But you know, for the solid week after the tornado, Steve Eddy, my MIC, never left my side. He was with me every day, all day long for a solid week. Okay. These two people were instrumental in keeping me sane, keeping me calm, and they kept everything positive. And so that allowed us to tackle every single day brand new and with positivity and the vigor to keep going and moving forward. Because every day was a new adventure. Every day brought in new challenges, and we worked through these things together. We talked, we brainstormed, we solved problems, we made decisions, but we did it together as a management team. And the way that they led me through every step of the way, and I knew that I wasn't going to fail because they were going to be there to catch me. And I will say that every office, if I can say one thing that came out of this, that I feel every office should have a very strong management team. Make sure that you have good relations with your MIC, good relations with your SUE, because when something like this happens, you need that support. And I'm very grateful to have had the support I did with the management team that is here at Paducah. So I don't know if Steve or Pat, or I know Pat's not watching because he's retiring, sitting on a beach someplace. But when I did this talk at the NWA, Steve happened to be with me there, and I was able to call him out and make him stand up in front of everybody. And everybody was able to see, you know, this wonderful person that helped me get through this week. So anyway, thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer it. But anyway, thanks for allowing me to speak today.
Thanks so much, Christine. Just such a tale of you kind of, like you said, getting thrown right into the fire right off the bat there. And just the extent of the damage is just so overwhelming. It's hard to even imagine without even having been there to see it like you all did. The extent of it had to be so overwhelming. One thing that you touched on, I thought it was really great, and Ryan touched on it too when he mentioned the RMA support from Keith Sherburne during the event. But you touched on mutual aid and kind of the need to have other offices step in and assist. And I just think that's so much part of our future as an agency, that, and this is such a great example of how we can help each other out. Have you taken any lessons learned from that mutual aid experience after this event and thought about anything further as far as like in real-time operations, mutual aid, or leaning on your neighboring WFOs to help out in additional damage surveys in the future, or anything like that? I'm just kind of curious what your lessons learned were from your mutual aid experience.
I think there's a lot of lessons learned, and there's a lot of things that, you know, we would do the same if this, you know, unfortunately comes to fruition again. But I think just being aware, the outpouring of support, the people that have contacted us wanting to help, I think is huge. And, you know, that's something we never even thought of. People were sending us food, you know, and that just kind of brings to light, you know, just how much of a brotherhood we all are out here to help each other out. And I think it's just realizing that, you know, if you go through something, that you're not alone. And that was a huge, I know, security blanket for me. It's like, you know, whatever we need, all I got to do is pick up the phone and call somebody. And I know that I'm going to get help from Chrissy. I'm going to get help from Mike in Louisville or whatever. If I needed something, just knowing that that help is there is, but anything, you know, beyond that, as far as anything we've done to make a best practice out of things, I think we're still working through a lot of that right now, and just trying to figure out what's going to work best. But I guess the overarching theme is that you know that you're not alone, and that people are wanting to help. They're basically, you know, saying, hey, what can we do to help you? And you just got to take that help, and you know, realize that people do want to help, and that they really mean that. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, great, Christine. Thank you so much. If anybody has questions, please raise your hand or type in the questions pane. Yeah, I just think, you know, as an agency, we have such capacity to provide mutual aid to each other, and you know, and I think we learned a lot. You know, that was one of the silver linings of the pandemic, was how we learned how effective we can be using Google Meets, and how effective we can be sharing technology and that sort of thing. So I think your example is more of a boots on the ground in some senses, but it's also the RMA the night before, obviously a great example of mutual aid. So I really appreciate you sharing your story, Christine. I don't see any questions at this time, so thanks so much. So we will now move on to Kyle Perez, who's going to talk about that remote mesoanalyst support and service backup. So Kyle, you should have a pop-up asking you to share your screen here in a moment.
Right.
Kyle is a forecaster at Springfield, Missouri, WFO. So thanks so much, Kyle, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Randy. Thank everybody before me as well, Ryan and Christine, and Dan's presentation coming up as well. Really set the stage here, going into the topic of mutual aid and how we're going to continue to expand upon that over the next decade and even beyond here in the National Weather Service. So my presentation today here will focus on how here at the National Weather Service in Springfield and Central Region in general, we leveraged the remote mesoanalyst program during the December 10th through 11th, 2021 tornado event. Other authors as well that helped out with this presentation include my SUE here at Springfield, Jason Shulman. Would also like to thank Keith Sherburne at Rapid City and Christopher Knowles, a lead meteorologist over at Paducah. So to begin, I'm going to kind of give you a brief overview if you're not familiar with the Central Region Remote Mesoanalyst Support Program. What exactly is it? So to break it down, you know, it's a mutual aid concept. So it's providing that mesoanalysis ahead of and during severe weather events. It's going to generally focus on the discussion of key points in areas of uncertainty and areas of concern. For example, environmental changes, storm morphology, convective initiation, and how the event may evolve over time. So I want to make sure that I emphasize this is not a forum, though, for second-guessing warning decisions, and we're leveraging the expertise. For example, we continue to leverage the expertise from the SPC, from the WFOS group, lots of different expertise that continues to see this program expand and develop over the last year. The end goal of the RMA program is to enhance situational awareness and decision support, and as building a one NWS working towards the same end goal. Here's a couple slides. I actually stole these from you, Randy, from one of your presentations, but I really wanted to hit this home here, that the RMA program is establishing a foundation. We're utilizing Google Chat, which allows image sharing. I believe Ryan had even mentioned that how the RMA program is also a post-event learning experience, and a great opportunity for folks to even just follow along in the room when an event is actually going on. And remember that this chat is focused on mesoanalysis concepts and is not a forum for second guess warning decisions. So what exactly does the RMA support look like? So I just captured a few, several different images here. We have soundings, you have surface map analysis, you have, you know, areas of different uncertainty and confidence. These are all selected. So you could share all these images and they can be interpreted in many different ways. So there's not just the images that go along with it. There's also the context, and that's where the facilitators play a role in really leveraging that expertise in the mesoanalysis to kind of give you a better idea of what does this map mean to me, or what does it mean to you, and how can it affect your forecast going forward and warning decisions potentially. So I'm not going to spend too much time on setting up the stage here for the December 10th, 11th event. As many of you know, it was a large area of enhanced across portions of the mid-Mississippi Valley with that moderate embedded across portions of southeast Missouri into southern Illinois and western Tennessee and western Kentucky, which included a 15% tornado hatched area. So for the RMA initiation, this is just showing you an example of what that would look like. This is from Central Region ROC, sending out a message on the day of, setting up the support for that day, letting us know that Keith Sherburne would be our main initial facilitator for the RMA, and going forward with that event and how long you know, other facilitators may be participating as well. So as far as NWF our WFO participation for this particular event. It included RMA support for Springfield, which is my home office, included St. Louis's, Paducah, and Louisville. Facilitators through the event, while Keith Sherburne was the main facilitator through the main part of the event, it also included support from Alex and Brian as well. So here's a radar capture. This is the yellow outline area is the Springfield CWA. And this is what our radar looked like about 15 minutes before we went into full service backup for Paducah for this event. So as you can see, you know, our event's winding down. You know, you're starting to see where you could loosen up staffing, who can you send home from our event, and such and so on. You're just starting to wind down. And many of you know how that is when winding down for a particular event. You're just collecting reports and basically wrapping up the entire event. But meanwhile, in the far right part of the screen there, you can see in the pink there, that is on my GR analyst there, you can see where it's going, a tornado, ongoing tornado warning with an active tornado on the ground is going through Mayfield, Kentucky. And then that's when things change. This is where mutual aid set the stage. You know, Paducah takes a power hit and they go down hard. But as you can see here, they mentioned that there will be no impact of any of the tornado warnings that are currently in effect, and that NWS Springfield will be taking over operations. So I thank them for that tweet there. Is that definitely put the pressure on me as the radar operator going forward for this event. But nonetheless, the stage was set now as we went into full operational convective warning mutual aid backup for Paducah for this event. So this is what the radar looked like when we took over officially at 9:52 p.m. Central Time. As you can see, there is an ongoing tornado emergency for Benton, Kentucky, with a downstream considerable tornado warning going across portions of Kentucky Lake and portions further northeast. Looking at velocity, as many of you saw on that particular night, very nasty radar signature and velocity signatures. If you cut and dice everything up with this particular event, there's a lot to look at. And that can be a presentation in its own, just picking apart all the different radar aspects of this particular event. Over the course of the next hour, during mutual aid service backup, NWS Springfield would go on to issue 4 different tornado emergencies for the circled towns there. And those are the times that those tornado emergencies were issued for those particular towns. And it really just goes into building that mutual aid concept that has been talked about here today. So kind of digging in a little more to how RMA's support was used during this service backup event. You know, it allowed me as a radar operator and my radar assistant, that was my WCM that night, to really quickly come up to speed on the environment. Now, this was not necessarily the sole intention of the RMA support program, but nonetheless, it was utilized that night in that particular aspect to leverage it. You know, we're winding down with our event, like I mentioned, and you know, we know that there's some nasty storms going on across you know, portions of western Kentucky at the time, but you don't know that you're going to be necessarily issuing tornado emergencies and such going forward within the next 15 to 20 minutes. So here's the first message actually that came across shortly after we took over service backup from Keith Sherburne, mentioning that you know, there's continuously seeing that the structure of the storm is really not going to see any kind of interruption for at least the next hour or two. And there's going to be some additional upscale growth potentially after that time frame. So these are the things that are kind of going through my mind as a radar operator at this time. What do I need to know? What's the downstream environment like? Is there any signs of weakening or strengthening? How do these play a part in potentially tornado damage to the tags? what do the warning durations look like? This is a long track tornado supercell. So how ahead of time can I get the warning out for people to take cover and take the proper action for safety? So I grabbed a few other screenshots of how RMA supported our event. Like I mentioned, this program just continues to grow, and just providing this different expertise through an event like this really just added to the confidence in the warning decisions that were being made that evening, and it really allowed us to make life-saving decisions in the face of reality there. Here's another one from Keith Sherburne, just analyzing, the STP for that night. Great share here, and mentioning, how the values really continue to nose up into portions of Western Kentucky, their high STP values. So to really summarize that up, I like to call it mutual aid to the rescue for this particular event. You have two different aspects of mutual aid. You have the mutual aid aspect of Springfield backing up Paducah, but you also have the mutual aid aspect of the RMA program. So it was just really great showcase for how we can continue to leverage that going forward here over the next several years. So for service backup warning summary, we were in service backup for a total of 5 hours. There's 13 tornado warnings issued, 3 base, 6 considerable, and 4 emergencies. And then we also issued 6 severe thunderstorm warnings and 1 flash flood warning during that time period. So RMA really just, it was not necessarily leveraged the same way that it's leveraged every time, but it allowed me to quickly come up to speed on the environment that particular night and increase my confidence on downstream warnings and tornado damage threat tags going forward. And I just wanted to kind of wrap up here with mutual aid concept of RMA moving forward. This is a program that's still sort of in its infancy, and we've really just starting to see some of the best practices and lessons learned from the RMA program. So we're going to continue to leverage the use of new tools going forward, continue to onboard new facilitators, and there's even the potential expansion of this program going forward. This is not just a concept that is going to be utilized by us potentially going forward here in Central Region, but how can other regions leverage it? Is there really going to be regional boundaries going forward, and how we can cross those regional boundaries to work towards the same one NWS goal going forward. So once again, I just wanted to thank everybody else that was part of this presentation, and also thank our presenters here today.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. If you have a question or comment for Kyle, again, please raise your hand or type it in the questions pane. I love the point you hit on there, Kyle, about kind of an unintended use of the RMA to help you spin up on the environment, and when you guys had to take over as service backup for Paducah. What a great example of the power of mutual aid. One question I had for you is, can you maybe describe how your operations changed, what you did when Paducah went down, as far as how you divided up warning issuance and that sort of thing, since you still had stuff going on in your area, I believe, at the time. How did you guys kind of change your operations configuration?
Yeah, so what we did is what was the current primary radar operator, because we had sectorized in our particular CWA at the time anyway. So our primary radar operator at that time for the Springfield area continued to warn for the rest of Springfield, and then he would go on to cover, go into service backup and cover what was along the cold front, was kind of a broken line, QLCS line at that point, going into portions of Western Kentucky there. Meanwhile, I was spun up as the primary radar then for Paducah's office, with a radar assistant at my side as well. And so a key point to go along with that, with Paducah going down hard in this particular event, is that we were not getting any data into AWIPS, any radar data. All the data that was going into the warning decision was, solely based off of what we were seeing on GR2. and satellite and leveraging other tools that were at our hands there. But in general, it just was warning on the AWEP screen using MRMS reflectivity.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And your office did just a fantastic job jumping in on that night, of course. So thanks for that, Kyle. There was a comment that came in. It was actually towards me. They asked if I could comment about the number of posts and number of people in each chat room and how it can be overwhelming at times. And that's true. You know, Kyle had early in your presentation, you kind of had that slide that showed what our original vision for the RMA was, with the facilitator kind of talking in the big chat room and then conveying that information to the offices that are impacted. But what we found when we started this was that a lot of forecasters just wanted to be in the big chat room. But it can be very active for those of you that have been in there. It can be very fast paced. And so one of the things we're looking at for next year is looking more back to the original model that we had, where the office mesoanalyst is interfacing with the facilitator more directly and not so much in the big chat room. And this would also, for those of you who will follow this year, SPC was in there for probably like 10 events this year. And that would actually help them out a lot too, because the signal to noise ratio is kind of high on the noise side for SPC's participation. So we may go more to a model next year to kind of, so it's one, so the WFO mesoanalyst doesn't have to sift through so many chats, and two, to get SPC more fully engaged, which has been awesome. They've been great. But it would help them if we were going more to the model that you showed, Kyle, on one of your first slides, with the facilitators talking directly to the offices, more so than the local mesoanalyst jumping into the big chat room. The big chat room will still be there, of course, and that's really important, but the facilitator would distill the information from that chat and communicate it to the WFO. So more to come on that. So thanks so much, Kyle. I don't see any other questions or hands raised. Appreciate you sharing your material today. Okay, now we'll move on to our final presentation of the morning. And that is Dan McKemy from Louisville. He's a forecaster, and he's going to talk on radar warning operator perspective and drone work. So Dan, thanks so much for joining. The floor is yours.
All right, yeah, thanks for hosting this, Randy, and for having me on today. As he mentioned, I was one of the warning forecasters here at Louisville for this big event. Definitely the biggest event of my career. And maybe for some people, events, start off pretty busy. Maybe they start off calm in these kind of events. For me, when I came into the office, it was pretty busy. Not just from preparing for severe weather, but also just kind of from some unusual things that happened. So I worked a hybrid evening mid-shift that particular night. And when I came into the office, the folks here were dealing with a plane that had just crashed within the CWA. And unfortunately, there were fatalities. But you all know with that, there's rock forms to fill out. There's folks we got to reach out to make sure data is getting archived. We might be taking media inquiries, that kind of thing. So we had all this going on ahead of our potentially big outbreak. And then to top it off, storms were starting to fire up to our west just a little bit earlier than we had hoped for, at least forecasted. And SPC would actually put out a tornado watch pretty quickly that included us. We thought, and then most of this event was during the early morning hours of the 11th for us, but it definitely started during the evening hours of the 10th with storms moving in from the west. We had a lot of shear, a lot of instability, what you would pretty much expect for an outbreak. So we knew it was going to be, unfortunately, a very long night. And so I got spun up on the radar operations pretty quickly. I got familiar with the environment, and we had storms moving in from Paducah's CWA into ours within the first couple hours of my shift. And the storms on radar looked really, really good. Well-established mesocyclones, good-looking supercells on the radar with tornado potential. So from a radar side of things, you just looking at that alone, you might be like, well, okay, put out the warning, that's easy. But as we all know, there's more to it than just the radar. And we were on the edge of a very tight SIN gradient where these storms were moving in from Western Kentucky into Central Kentucky. And so it wasn't so much a matter of whether or not these storms via radar could produce something. We were more concerned about how stable were the low levels or how strong was the inversion to potentially inhibit tornado genesis. And so it was a really tough call. When you got these tight gradients and you don't have a lot of upper air data in those particular areas to be able to analyze or to look at, warning decisions, it can be kind of tough. You got to rely on some model data. Thankfully, out here, we have a mesonet in the state of Kentucky that is amazing, provides lots of great OBS. And so we could analyze that and at least get an idea of surface parameters and how far east some of the moisture plumes had advected and what we could kind of at least make out from what a forecast model could look like, applying what the surface parameters were. But again, there's still a lot of uncertainties. And so for a lot of the storms that occurred early in the evening, I ended up going with tornado warnings. And for the first 4 that I issued, none of them verified. And it's not to say that those supercells didn't produce tornadoes. In fact, just literally 1 county west of our border, there was a TDS on the radar from one of the supercells, and produced a small tornado, but picked it up just before it crossed into our border. So we were on the edge of potentially seeing a tornado move into our CWA, but just didn't happen. So the environment was definitely there, but it was just a really, really tough warning environment. Now, as the night went on, we had more eroding of the SIN, and it looked like we had better instability to work with, so confidence was beginning to increase. We would potentially have more tornadic activity. And a lot of this was also aided from the RMA chat that's already been alluded to in previous discussions. And so here I'm just giving a hat tip to Keith Sherburne. He was a great help that night, and he wasn't the only one in the chat. There were several others who contributed and did an awesome job. But for the Mayfield storm in particular, we were watching that as it was approaching us, and we still had that gradient in SIN. It had shifted a little bit to the east, and we were having confidence that stuff could probably hold together, but it was a question of how far into our CWA could this hold. And so being able to discuss this internally in our office as well as through the RMA chat helped give me confidence in putting out some long duration tornado warnings. And so this is a screenshot of pretty much when I put out my tornado warning for the Mayfield storm as it was pushing off into our CWA. And so as you all know, Kyle did a fantastic job in Springfield with service backup, issuing the tornado warnings out there. And then just kind of having confidence in the environment that we were going to have a potentially strong tornado push into our CWA well out ahead of it, issued a long duration tornado warning where on the west side of the warning, you had as little as 30 minutes of lead time. And then on the east side, you had as much as an hour of lead time when all was said and done. And we were posting messages as well in NWS chat, just giving folks a heads up that this was a very, very significant supercell, and that this would probably be the strongest we'd had in nearly a decade. And it'd been since about 2012 that we had had a tornado that was stronger than EF2 rating within our CWA. So it had been a long time since we had had a strong tornado push through. And so for some folks, maybe they haven't even been out here that long and may not be aware of, what these storms are capable of. So we were trying to alert people that this is not your ordinary tornado warning, and we want you all to take shelter as soon as you can and to take your actions as soon as you can, because we knew this particular one was bad just based on the environment, as well as reports that we'd been getting downstream. And so the Mayfield tornado ended up tracking through our CWA for, I think it was about 35 miles before it lifted. It did end up actually producing at least a couple of other small tornadoes, but really the next big tornado that impacted our region was further to the south and west. And this line would push out of Tennessee and eventually into southern Kentucky. And it was a very complicated storm. It wasn't your classical supercell storm like what Mayfield was, but it wasn't a QLCS. It wasn't a complete line. It was a hybrid of sorts. We had a lot of various circulations developing, some supercellular characteristics with some linear characteristics embedded. It was just a very messy hybrid type of situation. And it ended up producing some pretty strong tornadoes as well. And so we were watching these storms and put out warnings out ahead of them to anticipate kind of where some of these new circulations would develop. And Bowling Green, one of our biggest metro areas within the state, was unfortunately in the target of this particular storm. And so we alerted folks as early as we could that there could be potentially multiple tornadoes associated with this cluster or line or whatever you want to call it as it pushes through. And so we tried to give folks a heads up that, you know, this could be pretty bad. People need to be taking action and be aware of what's going on. And to add to all of this, all of my wife's family is from the Bowling Green, Kentucky area. And so I was texting her ahead of this and letting her know, hey, something bad's coming. They should really be taking action, taking cover. You know, not knowing for sure where it's going to set up or move, you know, it's better to be safe than sorry. They should probably start taking some actions now. And thankfully, most of them were okay. Some of her extended family did have some damage from the tornadoes, but everyone came out physically fine, which was really, really good. But we were messaging these storms ahead of time as they were pushing through. And then we actually had access to a webcam at Western Kentucky University. They have a tower cam that kind of overlooks the city. And so we could see power flashes ongoing in the city live. And so, you know, a lot of this event up to this point, you know, everything we were basing our warnings on were radar observed or reports downstream. But this was the first time that we actually could see something going on live, you know, outside of radar signatures. And so, you know, we saw the power flashes going on. We had the warnings out, and you can see here some of these circulations. The two were actually fairly close to each other. The main one was an EF3 circulation, high-end EF3, and the southern one was an EF2, and they came pretty close together when the storm wrapped up, but ended up maintaining separate paths. So when all was said and done, I had issued 14 total tornado warnings that night. So you remember the first 4 I issued were not verified, but the last 10 all verified with tornadoes. So it was just an incredibly busy, an incredibly insane night, just from a tornado perspective. And we were out surveying that very morning. So I wrapped up my warnings shortly after 4 a.m. A few more warnings may have gone out afterwards, but then within a few hours of that, we had folks going down to Bowling Green just based on the damage that we were getting. We knew that particular area had been probably hit the hardest just because it was a big population center, and we had a strong tornado move through there. And we, when we were on shift, we had heard radio chatter coming out of Bowling Green and social media reports of, you know, potential damage, potential injuries, things like that, but you really don't have a good idea of the scope of damage until usually the sun rises and, you know, people go out and assess the event. And so for the days afterwards that went on after this event, we just kept getting news of injuries and fatalities, and just seeing this stuff was heartbreaking. You know, as a warning forecaster, you know, we put out these warnings. We tried to get our message out as best as we could for people to take action. And so, you know, it's heartbreaking to see people lost their lives, and you just wonder, in some sense, was there more as an office that we could have done to help alert people? Because you just hate to see this. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of this occurred in the middle of the night, you know, somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. So for a lot of these folks, if they didn't have a way for warnings to wake them up, they may not have had enough action or time to take action. And so I was out on a damage survey the very next day on December 12th. And this one was one of the toughest surveys that I've ever done. And not so much from a damage rating perspective, but more so just from a psychological perspective. Most of the surveys I'd done up to this point had been EF0, EF1. So, you know, we're talking some tree branches snapped, maybe some minor roof damage, you know, nothing too terrible. Usually you didn't have any injuries or fatalities or anything of that sort. You know, you come out to this and it looks like a bomb went off. You know, Christine described this well with the surveys that she experienced in Paducah. You just look around, and everywhere you look, and in some areas, it just looks like total destruction. You know, trees completely torn apart, homes moved off of their foundations or completely destroyed. It was really awful to see, but there was a lot of positivity from the folks that we met out there. Mind you, this event occurred 2 weeks before Christmas, and so, you know, for a lot of folks, you know, maybe they had plans for Christmas, or maybe, you know, they were thinking about the holidays, and so, you know, you have this thrown in to the mix where everybody, you know, some people lost everything, was really tough, but they had a positive outlook on a lot of things, and many of them were thankful just to have their lives. We also utilized drones on our surveys, and so long story short, we had received a grant and approval to be able to use drones for river and storm damage surveys within our CWA. And so we had these drones readily available for us to be able to use on surveys. And for these particular surveys, it wasn't really a question of whether or not a tornado occurred, you know, trying to differentiate, was it tornadic or straight line winds? But rather, I found the drones most useful on these surveys for estimating damaged widths. So in this picture, for example, you can see there's a widespread swath of damage to trees where a lot of them were just completely taken down. And from ground level, sometimes it can be really hard to estimate just how wide damage paths are when you start getting, you know, above 1/10, 2/10, quarter mile or more. And so being able to use a drone to get a picture and then pull the geotagged information from that image to co-locate it with something like Google Maps, and then kind of use measuring tools to get an idea of just how wide that damage swath was extremely helpful for the surveys. And, you know, there were some areas too where towards the end of the tornado's life, we had more skipping damage. So some sections of trees or areas were completely untouched, and then you would see damage maybe 1/10, 2/10 of a mile down from that location. And from ground level, in this part of the country, it's sometimes hard to really be able to see just how far damage paths go, just because we have a lot of trees, hills, terrain, you name it. And so being able to fly the drones up and kind of get a picture of how far that damage extends helped us improve the accuracy of the tornado damage paths in general. So the drones were extremely useful for a lot of the operations that we had on these surveys. And then in the days and the weeks that followed the event, the office had a lot of support just from various officials within NOAA or even outside of the agency. We had Dr. Spinrad, the director of NOAA, send John a letter. The Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky, as well as the EMA director, Mike Dossett of Kentucky, you know, all just praised the office for the job that they did. They were very happy with the conference calls that we provided ahead of the event, the warnings during the event, the damage surveys we did after the event. They were happy with everything that we were able to provide. And it was just really nice to kind of get those compliments after the event and the support. I think it helped a lot of the staff. And then a lot of TV partners reached out to us afterwards too and offered their appreciation. I included one of the quotes here because I think it really keys in on what we try to do. So Jay Cardosi says, without the many accurate and timely warnings, the death toll would have been much higher. Never before has teamwork between NWS and media proved to be so important and critical as it did that particular night. And I think Jay's right. As weather service, we want to build relationships with TV partners. We want to build trust. So that way, during these chaotic nights, when we might be putting out a lot of warnings, we want them, to trust the warnings that we're putting out and to communicate that to save lives and property. And then I just want to also highlight, internally, we had a lot of offices offer support. Several chipped in to order pizzas for our office after the event. And you might think, well, okay, that's not too big of a deal. But after a long day of surveys, coming back to the office and having pizza was kind of nice. So it was a really thoughtful gesture from those offices, and something I definitely want to do for other offices too. After big events, I think it's important to help each other out. And then we had mutual aid from Jackson, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee. Those offices, they helped with storm damage surveys. So much so that the WCM in Jackson, Jane Marie Wicks, she spent several days out in our CWA surveying, and even brought one of their vehicles out here so we could maximize the number of surveys we did. So rather than having 3 vehicles, we could use 4 to pretty much go out and assess all of the damage paths. So that was really, really useful. This is my final slide. I just want to highlight the significance of this particular event. So we had 18 total tornadoes within our CWA. So Southern Indiana, Central Kentucky, 59 counties is what we cover. So we had 18 tornadoes within our CWA, and 4 of them produced EF3 damage. Prior to this event, since 1950, we had only had 7 tornadoes occur during the month of December within the CWA. So considering 70 years worth of December, so 1950 through 2020, 70 years worth of Decembers, only 7 tornadoes during all of those months. And then this night we have 18. So you can see why this particular event was historic on a lot of levels. If this occurred in the spring, it would still be a very significant event. But the fact that it occurred in December, which is typically our quiet month for tornadoes, was historic and significant on a lot of levels. So with that, Randy, I guess I'll turn it over to questions. But I thank you guys for your time.
Thanks so much, Dan. Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand or type them in the questions pane. So much great information there, Dan. I love your advanced tornado warning, the one that you issued well in advance so that some of them had an hour of lead time. That's that in an event like this, that's just so fantastic to see. I'm curious in your office operations, how you are utilizing mesoanalysis in real time to kind of help you make that warning decision.
Yeah, so we have a lot of different things we look at. So from looking at observations online, we have the Mesonet, the Kentucky Mesonet, which provides a lot of great data for mesoanalysis purposes. With us having a big airport here, we utilize aircraft data that comes in and out of SDF or Sanford Field in Louisville. That's kind of our best way to get any sort of upper air data, but it just kind of depends on when the flights are coming in and out. So it's time dependent for that. And then, amongst the forecasters here, during our bigger events, we may have someone working the radar desk while someone else is a meso analyst. And so that meso analyst may be looking at SPC graphics, Mesonet stuff, surface obs, aircraft data. We've been utilizing the RMA as well when it's available and when it's staffed. And so we found a lot of uses, I think, just internally and externally, being able to collaborate and work together with folks on really improving the mesoanalysis in our office.
Great. Thanks for those comments, Dan. And one thing that kind of resonated as you're making those comments is the RMA doesn't replace your mesoanalysis in the local office. It's a supplement, right? So and it might have been done in this event. I'm trying to remember if we were still active at the time at 12 to 1 a.m. or not.
Yeah, that's correct. And I mean, we talked about some of the warnings and some of the things, especially ahead of the Mayfield tornado, on what to do. But just having that extra bit of confidence from, call it a third party or whatever you want, just from the RMA, definitely provided a confidence boost going forward. So it never hurts to sometimes get those extra opinions or insight, because there may be some things that you miss too.
Absolutely. When you get into triage mode to talk about during warning operations, sometimes it's hard to keep up with everything because things are going so fast and there's so much information available. I did want to make a comment on the, we went back to default, or we switched to a 30-minute default tornado warning length back in like 2012 or something, and that hurt our lead time stats. So the default should be 45 minutes now. I think we switched that back last year. So default tornado warning length should be 45 minutes. I just wanted to bring that up. I think that's something we'll be re-emphasizing as we head into next spring. So thanks, Dan. I don't have any comments or questions. There's two things that I want to wrap up with. So thanks to everyone, to Ryan, Christine, Kyle, Dan, and all of your co-authors on your presentations for putting this material together and sharing it today. It was just fantastic. So I had two final things, and then I'm going to have Ariel Cohen make a comment here at the end. Kyle mentioned about expanding into other service areas besides convection. And we're going to be sending out information very shortly that Central Region and Eastern Region are going to jointly have mutual aid for snow squall warnings starting in mid-December. It'll look almost exactly the same as our convective RMA does, very similar. So they'll look for information on that. And that'll be something that we're going to spin up and kick the tires on this winter. It'll be exciting because it'll be 2 regions, and it'll be a different phenomena. And then next spring, the plan with the convective RMA is to expand it at least into part of Eastern Region and part of Southern Region, not the entire regions, but part of them. So it's growing, and we're excited for that. And then I wanted to mention that next week there is a presentation on convective warning mutual aid that a few offices in Central Region have tested out this winter, or this summer and fall, along with a forecaster from SPC. And that has been led by Ariel Cohen, the MIC in Pueblo. And that's been Pueblo, Bismarck, and Topeka have participated in this and have had a great experience testing out actual convective warning mutual aid. And I was looking for Ariel. I don't see you on here, Ariel, on the call. So tune in for that next week. It's going to be another example of mutual aid, and something that we're going to continue to grow and nurture in Central Region and beyond. So thanks everyone so much for joining today, and thank you for the presenters for the excellent presentations. Have a good Wednesday, everyone.